Ron Benbasad. I'm from Los Angeles. I flew in on the red eye last night. I think I'm officially now too old to take the red eyes. And I am an internist in Beverly Hills. I've been practicing for 20 years. I am board certified, and I recertified when I was 40. I'm 49 now, and I really have no intention of ever doing this again. In fact, my lease is up next year when I turn 50, and many of the changes that Ken and Paul discussed come into play next year. So I have to make some very serious decisions about my professional career. I don't have all the answers to what we're talking about here, and I'm not at all against board certification, and I'm certainly not against keeping up to date, but how this all came to be when I was 40, these recertification things just happened to fall on the decade marks for me. When I was 40, I did this thing, and for internal medicine at the time, it was 5 self-evaluation modules and a secure examination. And to give you an idea, for internal medicine anyway, for us it was the 5 self-evaluation modules and the secure examination. And so for literally a 6-7 month period of time with a buddy from residency, we spread our textbooks out around the dining room table. We studied pulmonary, infectious disease, all the various disciplines within internal medicine, and took these 5 self-evaluation modules, which were very complicated, very difficult, really didn't have anything to do with the day-to-day life of being a practicing internist, and it seemed more like we're studying stuff that we did 10 years ago when we finished our residency training program. I mean, I don't really need to know how to adjust a ventilator at this point and interpret ABGs and prescribe HIV medicine or prescribe chemotherapeutic agents. If I diagnose someone with HIV or with cancer, I refer them to the specialist. We don't practice in a vacuum. I'm very much a bread and butter internist. I'm doing H&Ps and pre-ops and sick visits, and I'm into the groove of what I do, and I keep up to date in that area when I do my continuing education requirements. So I'm doing this kind of thing, and I'm thinking, and my father is an engineer, and like any licensed profession, us, engineers, lawyers, Andy, architects, we all have continuing education requirements. But why are we having to do more? And as I got further and further into this process with my buddy and became more and more unhappy and agitated about the whole thing, I really started to investigate, why are we doing this? Who's behind this? What's this all about? And just one example, if I took one of the self-evaluation modules online and submitted the answers, 2 seconds later, I got that, let's just say I got 42 out of 50 right. Well, what if I wanted to have an explanation for those 8 questions that I didn't get? Well, if you'd like an explanation to those questions, guess what? When I was 40, 9 years ago, for $980 more, I would have to join the American College of Physicians because they would give you the answers. So it was as like, I don't know if you've seen the movie The Matrix, but it's like, Morpheus pulled the connection out of the back of my head, and I was finally unplugged, and I saw my existence, and I'm like, this is madness. This is sheer madness. The double dipping, the extortion, and, again, it had nothing to do with what I was doing. And then, of course, there's the secure exam, and for those of you that have not taken the secure exam, I can tell you it's a wildly demeaning and insulting process where you have to remove your watch, your wallet, any jewelry, put them in a locker. You are fingerprinted and photographed every time you walk in and out of the exam center. You're given 2 tissue papers and a magic eraser board to presumably take notes, and you have to return those 2 tissue papers, the 2 Kleenex at the end of the exam. God forbid anyone cheats, and I'm sure many of you heard about this Aurora, I think somebody mentioned it, where you sign a thing where it says you're not allowed to discuss the exam questions, but of course it's supposed to be a learning experience, right? Shouldn't I get those 8 questions explained to me that I didn't get? But no, I have to pay money to do that. And wouldn't it be a normal human, endeavor to discuss an exam afterwards and, hey, what did you put for that question? And what did you think about this? But these Aurora people were apparently found out by the ABIM in a very long, email chain, and the board sued 139 doctors. And Andy, you should look into this, because I heard on the down low that this Dr. Aurora had an agreement with the ABIM where he was supposed to pay them like $3 million on their lost revenue, because all of these fancy test questions, I was told by the chair-elect, they meet for a very minimal stipend, of course, the board members, and they meet, they come up with great test questions, and how test makers love to play games with us test takers, and there's really two parts to this process of studying or restudying material and then taking practice exams, which I think Ken showed with the med study guide, which is what I had used, just another expense. But anyway, so with this Aurora thing, what I heard that he was supposed to pay them $3 million, but instead offered $4.5 million with the promise, a handshake under the table, that the board would not go over those people that took the test. And in fact, they took his $4+ million and they sued those 139. Now, I have no proof of this. I just heard this, through the grapevine. But anyway, so I took the test. Thankfully, I passed it, but I vowed I'm never doing this again. But as I drove home from Pasadena, the one close place where I could take the test, I live in Beverly Hills, I'm driving home and I'm thinking to myself, why would I ever do this again? I mean, what was the point of that? I just spent, 6 to 8 months really upset and studying and not spending time with my friends or family, and quite miserable and angry about the whole thing. And then I thought to myself, well, what if they tie it to hospital privileges? What if they tie it to insurance participation or reimbursement? And what if they try linking it somehow to licensure? And so I got, kind of worked up about this. I wrote like a 9-page letter that I considered submitting to any medical journal or newspaper that would read it. I showed it to some of my friends. They're like, Ron, it's fantastic, but you gotta take the anger out of it. And I'm like, that's impossible. So I, used it as a therapeutic exercise. I put it in a folder, and I went back to my job, which was seeing patients, which I do every day. And, at this point, now that this is a few years later, every morning I have 27 to like 40 emails about this thing. I have an hour of work just on this stuff and doing this every day before I actually see my patients, and I talk to doctors every day. I fly out to these things when invited. But to get back to this whole story, so I'm driving, I write this paper, and I get back to work, and I sort of forget about it like everybody else does. Okay, I did this thing, horrible as it was. And then in 2005, I think it was, I got 3 emails on 3 consecutive days. And I know some of the faces here, and it's nice to see some new faces to tell this story to. And really, the entire story, both mine and Paul's, if you will, can be found in the AntiMOC articles and MOL links. And if you scroll down, there are YouTube video presentations of pretty much these talks, though Paul has perfected his into a fine art form. So anyway, I got these emails from the ABIM telling us now how MOC wasn't just the 5 self-evaluation modules and the secure examination, but that was this, that, practice improvement modules, peer evaluations, patient evaluations, and I could feel my blood pressure start to raise. And then the second day, I got another email from the ABIM saying how they were going to show the insurance plans of our participation so we could get, and I quote, monetary rewards and recognition. The steam was coming out of my ears at this point. And then the third day from my hospital, I got an email gauging interest in having after-hours review courses on MOC to do these self-evaluation modules in a group setting, not unlike this, where then you go home, submit the answers, and you get credit for it. So like on one hand, hey, let's do it together, a learning experience, let's make it easier for everybody. But on the other hand, another step, another expense, and what several have talked about, the hospitals buying into this program. So I pulled out that 9-page letter that I wrote, and it really became the nidus for this website, which I really didn't start at the time, but I started to talk to other doctors in Los Angeles, the president of the Young Physicians Association, and we had a meeting in December, I think it was of '09, about 80 doctors showed up, and there was a lot of concern, fear, about what to do, and do we have any say in this? And I was there. There was a doctor from the California State Medical Association, and also the head of the Los Angeles County Medical Association, and everybody had their ideas about what to do. And being naive, you know, what do kids do these days? They make a website, it spreads virally, and before you know it, you know, you're an internet sensation, and you've crushed the machine. It shows you how naive I was. But what it did show me is really how cowardly and fearful as a group doctors are, as well-educated, as intelligent. Really, collectively, we don't act very smartly in our own behalf, and this is really just the tip of the iceberg. Andy talked about several others, and Wayne as well. But this is really my only thing that I want to talk about here. So we had the meeting in December. It was very well received. I came to the office in January after the holidays, and so I wanted to do this grassroots thing. Somebody else said, oh, we should sue. Somebody else said, no, we've got to draft resolutions and do this politically, go up the food chain. And so I come back to the office in January, and I have what I assumed was a halter report under my door unmarked. I open it up, and I've basically got a deep throat. Somebody who has given me copies of resolutions that have already been drafted, and they were, you know, in 2002, 2005, 2007, and who are these people, and how come I didn't know about this? And so I started to investigate all these things, and they were all done by the House of Delegates AMA YPS section, and I didn't know what the YPS stood for, and it was Young Physician Section. Apparently the AMA is broken up into all these different sections. The YPS, Young Physicians, representing physicians under 40 who have been in practice less than 8 years. And so I Googled, I saw who the president of the YPS was. I called her up. I left her a very cryptic message about what I had been up to in Los Angeles, and Jules' friend Don Buckingham, the president at the time of the YPS, called me on a Sunday, and we talked for like 2 hours. I gave her my story and song and dance about what I'd been doing, and you know, we fell in love over the phone, even though she's married with 2 kids, or 3 kids, I think, and she's like, Ron, where have you been all my life? You have no idea what we're up against. We go into these rooms of old doctors, and they don't care, they're grandfathered, they just see dollar signs. How can I help you? And so with this, I found an ally, and we did, I should say, inform the ABIM of that initial meeting. And at first, they thought we were bluffing. And then when we had the meeting, they wanted to hear what we had talked about, and then they insisted finally that if we have another meeting, that they will send a representative. So we said, sure, great. So we had a meeting in March of 2010, again in Los Angeles, and they sent at the time the chair-elect, who was the head of the Department of Geriatrics at UCLA, who was basically the Bob Wachter equivalent of the day, who came with this PowerPoint presentation to tell us why we should be doing the MOC and why this is good and why patients want this and why the public wants this. And I don't know who it was, but somebody unplugged his projector, and we proceeded to annihilate this guy because he had not a leg to stand on. And what the board people, and you know, I would like to think that their heart was in the right place when they came up with this. Like, how can we ensure that our doctors are keeping up to date? How can we make a product that maybe tests doctors? But somewhere along the line, I mean, they really lost sight of this. And as doctors do, you know, they get singularly focused on something and don't see anything else but what they're doing, and they, you know, not only created the Kool-Aid here, but they're drinking it themselves, and they're lying to us And they're telling us that the public wants this, they're telling us that this makes us better physicians, they're telling us that this improves patient care and safety, and there is not one shred of evidence to that effect. And in fact, my board, the ABIM, started this recertification MOC stuff in 1990, so the first people didn't have to do it till 2000. So now we're already in 2013, and one of the latest developments is in 2014, as Paul mentioned, they're changing MOC to CMOC, so continuous maintenance of certification. They're reneging on people like me who did their certification a little bit early to get a couple. They said, do it early if you want. Extend the length of your time-limited certificate. So I do it a couple of years early, think I've got, instead of a 10-year, a 12-year thing, and now they've changed it because next year in March, you have to give them your credit card so they can start withdrawing these annual fees for their product, for their monopolized product. You have to participate, and I went to a conference recently where the president of the American College of Physicians, who's on the board of the American Board of Internal Medicine, gave one of these PowerPoint presentations with algorithms that was so complicated and so convoluted that it's like, where in all of this are you supposed to practice medicine and see patients? They've really lost sight of that, and I'd really like to think that they had their heart in the right place, but it's becoming more and more difficult for me to see that, especially when you click on that tax return link there and see some of the salaries that have been mentioned. And the biggest irony of this is Christine Cassell, the president of my board, who makes $800,000 a year, who's been one of the real architects of maintenance of certification, as her parting gift to those of us who actually practice medicine. She steps down in June. She has created, and I think Paul showed it, or maybe Ken did, the Choosing Wisely campaign, where they're telling us we're ordering too many tests and we're doing things that aren't necessary, but yet, on the other hand, or the flip side of this, they're testing us more. It's mind-boggling, the hypocrisy and the stupidity. So we had this meeting in January with the chair-elect, and a week later, unrelated to anything I was doing, any of the efforts in Los Angeles, the New England Journal of Medicine's editor-in-chief, Dr. Drazen, had a one-page editorial reconsidering certification, and there were pro and con articles or letters for and against recertifying, but it was only for those grandfathered. So I'm grandfathered, should I do this or shouldn't I do it? And there were arguments, compelling or not, for either case. And again, if you go to this AntiMOC article page, click it, it's all chronological. If you scroll all the way down, those resolutions are there, and then you'll see the New England Journal and these two papers, and then if you just start reading up, you'll see where we are today. Anyway, so I grabbed that 9-page thing I had mentioned earlier, and I whittled it down to a sparkling 1,200-word document, submitted it to Dr. Drazen for publication in response to these papers, and he called me, he said, I can't print this. And I go, and I promise you, I took the anger out of it. But it had all the financials, all the politics, and he says it's just too long. The requirements for a letter to the editor are 120 words, and yours is 1,200 words. Well, I didn't know, honestly, and so he said, if you can whittle it down to 400, I'll reconsider it. So, I'm starting to defang it, and I get it down to about a third of the size, and I'm not exaggerating. The meeting that we had was in February. The article came out in March. For a good 3 months, back and forth, we would negotiate on words and sentences, and I thought he was, sort of pulling my chain a little bit and just thinking maybe I'd lose interest or hope. But all of that time, I started to create the template for this website, which is now in probably its 4th or 5th incarnation, and I've had a lot of help along the way. Anyway, in June or July, I think it was of 2010, they printed my now toothless paragraph, but they did, as part of the deal, include the website, and that's really when this began, and this movement began, and that's really how my workload increased tremendously back then. And since then, there have been many, many articles, and I'll spare you the details on those that have been written. They're all there. But the thing I want to mention more than anything are the allies, because I had many sleepless nights. Like, why am I the only doctor who is upset about this? Why isn't anybody really coming to my aid? And so I was doing all of this by myself at great risk to myself. I'm in private practice. I have a wonderful practice. It's enviable by every account, and I'm jeopardizing it all by fighting the beast here. And lo and behold, the website gets launched, and I'm paranoid, and I'm anxious, and I'm having drenching night sweats. I kid you not. I kid you not. And I get an email from an allergist in Cadillac, Michigan. Where have you been? I am so pleased, all capital letters. And we exchanged a couple of emails, and the next thing you know, I got a check in the mail for $2,500 addressed to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And it said, "Feel the Force," and it was signed Luke Skywalker. And Martin Dubrovik, that allergist from Cadillac, Michigan, who is speaking after me, and I became very fast friends. And he was really the first ally in this fight, and it's been very meaningful to me. Not the money, obviously, but the friendship. And from that awareness and sending out these kinds of mass emails, I developed many, many more relationships with lots of physicians all across the country from various specialties, and none more important than Martin, and also sitting here and having spoken earlier, Paul Kempen. Both of these guys deserve a round of applause for their efforts, because I may have started something, but these guys have become far more prolific and impressive than I in their efforts here. Later that year, I got a phone call from someone by the name of Christine Cassell while I was seeing patients, and I knew this was bound to happen. My name was in the New England Journal. There was the website. I mentioned earlier how doctors are collectively cowards, but we're not stupid, so it really doesn't take much to put two and two together. And those drenching night sweats and the millions of, dreams and conversations I had with myself about that phone call came to fruition, and she called while I was seeing patients. And I was very, I think I disarmed her. I think she was really anticipating catching me off guard, and I caught her off guard with being knowledgeable about this stuff without being afraid of her, and being, somewhat charming and funny about it. And I have to tell you, she did not disagree with any of the things that I recommended at the time, which were: get rid of the secure exam. It has no place in the life of a practicing physician. Why should I take more time away from the practice, spend more money, deal with the stress of an exam, and then have to wait, several months again on a computerized, standardized test to see, based on a curve, if I passed, if I failed? She didn't disagree. Peer and patient evaluations? Come on. Who are you going to ask to review you? Some physician you work with and refer to, or somebody you've never worked with? And the same goes with patients. You're going to ask the patients that love you and refer you patients. So that just amounts to busy work when we should really be busy doing work. And then finally, the practice improvement modules. When I'm not working or living my life or studying for the self-evaluation modules, I'm supposed to take 100 charts on my diabetic patients and start collating data to submit to the ABIM's computer on my hemoglobin A1C management to be compared to physicians across the country and then get a practice improvement. It's all nonsense. All they have done is found a way to pad their pockets. They're misrepresenting what they do to the public, they're misrepresenting what they do to us, and it's all because they found a way to make money. I've met many other people. Ken, I want to mention, but how I met Ken was after this conversation with Dr. Cassell, where it went, I thought, quite well, and she said after 25 minutes, or I said after 25 minutes, I really have to get back to seeing patients. Certification is, again, taking time away from patient care, Dr. Cassell. She insisted on a follow-up conversation. She sent me some propaganda that they had written and generated. And one thing that wasn't very clear from your two guys' talks is all of the studies that these guys push out to the public or put into the medical journals. Remember, they are the sweethearts of the journals. They have the ears of the journals because it's all part of the same double-dipping money extortion scheme. They have people on the board. So Dr. Cassell, the president and CEO, is stepping down in January. The new guy who's coming in, Richard Barron, I believe, who was a practicing internist, he's been groomed for this. When I read that he was to be named the new president of the ABIM, I started to research him. And in 2005, he was talking about the benefits that he had from pulling these 100 charts and going through the hemoglobin A1C. So it was clear he was part of this thing, and I worry that with Cassell leaving, we may be getting something worse rather than someone who's actually representing the practicing, physician interests. But after this conversation, which didn't go very well, it was much more political, the second conversation with Dr. Cassell. Ron, you've entered a political environment. Ron, there are external factors and tertiary parties that are requiring this now. And it was just, time to move on. So I'm seeing patients again a few months later, and my employees interrupt me. There's a Dr. Eck from the Association of the American Physicians and Surgeons on the phone. And again, the blood drains from my face. What have I done now? And instead, this wonderful woman said that she'd been following the website, reading the various letters I get into journals, and would I be interested in coming to their meeting in January of 2012, it must have been, in Las Vegas. And I was sure, so I came and I presented a similar story to them in January and got them interested in this issue, which many of them did not know about. Ken pretty much attacked me afterwards, like, we've got to talk. And it was great. And again, I've really made a lot of really nice and lasting friendships through this. I've also made a lot of enemies. Speaking of enemies, my two main my right and left-hand men, if you will, at the beginning of this were both threatened, and they both called me on the same day. Martin got a letter from the lawyers of the Board of Allergy and Immunology threatening him because in one of his letters he had written that the director instead of the president, or maybe it was the president against the director, minutia. So they were threatening to sue him over this, basically cease and desist from writing this stuff. And not 15 minutes later, after I talked Martin off the ledge, I get a call from Paul who's, Ron, I have to take a step back from this. Something terrible happened here today. I got called into the chair of my department. I thought I was being called into lunch, and, he sat me down and he said, well, Paul, you're not really working out here anymore. And Paul's like, well, what's wrong? Well, we've been reading your anti-board writings, and you're just not working out here anymore. And so I was on suicide watch with these guys for a couple of days. And I'm just thinking to myself, how come they haven't come after me? What are they going to do to me if this is what they're doing to my, two main guys? I'm not affiliated with an institution other than being on staff. I'm not in an academic center like these guys are. I'm a private practice physician, so they may go to their $400 billion or $1 million ATM board machine and pull out some money and take out a hit on me. Don't think I haven't thought of that. We are challenging with you people here basically like the tobacco industry. These guys make a lot of money, and we are challenging a huge revenue stream, but they don't have a leg to stand on. We're on the right side of this issue, and we're on the truth here. So other than these delightful enemies, I've made great allies. At the AAPS, I've been invited to Doctor for Patient Care meetings. I actually met Martin and Paul both for the first time, I think it was last summer in DC. We had been like pen pals, except, email buddies, whatever the term is. And we had such a good time hanging out and meeting and giving these talks that we've all become friends, and we've tried to educate doctors. I mean, I am doing it every day. I have 2 full-time jobs every day. I talk to doctors every day about this. One thing I would recommend, and I with Alita and Andy and Paul, we all flew or went to Philadelphia a few weeks ago to this Benjamin Rush Society debate, and Paul and Andy were on the one side of the issue, and obviously these other guys were on the other side. But what was interesting, that the Benjamin Rush Society, despite multiple invitations to the American Board of Internal Medicine, whose home is in Philadelphia, refused to come. So Christine Cassell couldn't make it on a Saturday. Eric Holmboe, the chief medical officer, who, if you haven't seen his frightening 3-minute video, you really should catch it. The ABIM has launched it's a full-on media assault, because they're gearing up for this shift in 2014 with this MOC to CMOC, and they're talking about how seamless and beautiful and how less expensive. I see one of you guys showed this $257, but it's a smokescreen. It's going to be smaller amounts in more frequent increments, taking you out of the office even more, costing you more. The only way to do this is to squash this thing in its tracks, and we have to act quickly before this is even more entrenched in 2014. And one of the biggest problems I've found is just motivating doctors to get their heads out of the sand on this thing. You know, we've all been beaten into submission throughout our professional training, and we just kind of do what we're told to do. And like I said, when I was driving home, you know, and I pulled this thing out from the Matrix, it was like, am I the only one that sees the truth here? And clearly I'm not now. And like I said, so many more people are involved, and I'm just, you know, after Paul and Ken's talk, I'm almost, you know, I really don't need to come to these anymore. They're doing my bidding for me. But really, I have always felt mass non-compliance. If physicians just say no to this, we can defund these organizations. Are they going to come and take care of my patients or your patients? I don't think so. I don't think Christine Cassell, stepping down or not, is going to come out of her ivory tower, or is Eric Holmboe, the chief medical officer who makes over $400,000 a year at the ABIM, or is Rebecca Lipner, who is the PhD, who's the head of psychometric testing, who makes a couple of $300,000 at the ABIM. I mean, I can mention names. You can look at them all up there. It's obscene what these people make in comparison to what the average practicing internist does. And they're basically these ivory tower, bureaucratic, politician, non-practicing physicians, for the most part, making rules for those of us on the front lines. And one thing they like to do also is, who makes the tests are members of the board of these various boards. But the members of the board who make these salaries are not writing the tests. People who are on the board, and I know it's a fine distinction. I'm getting the cut time here. I do want to say just a couple more things. These guys that write the board questions get a minimal stipend. They like to throw that in your face, whereas the people that are actually employed by the boards and are making these rules make hundreds of thousands of dollars. Mass non-compliance, formation of an alternative certifying board, which we'll hear about in a minute, political, writing letters to and contacting your state legislators. Paul and Ken were instrumental in getting this going in Ohio, and many states have followed. And finally, the fourth option, I have always felt, was the last option, was the legal option, which is suing. And I did bring a check. Where is it? Here. I have a check for $1,000 to give to the AAPS for the legal fund, and I would challenge every physician here and watching to do the same, because really this is the last organization fighting for us. And the latest developments are as follows. The collusion with the FSMB has been discussed. The insertion into Obamacare has been discussed. The 2014 conversion into CMOC has been discussed. And the last thing I had mentioned for the ABIM in 1990, they started this. 2000 was the first cycle, 2010 the second cycle. They're now changing the rules on those of us that did it a couple of years early. They're saying, too bad. I've seen the emails that people have sent me. They basically go, yeah, we changed our mind, too bad. You just have to do it the way we say it, no explanation given. But now they have something called the 2020 Task Force or something like this. This thing started in 1990. They've gone through several recertification cycles, and now they have a task force that's going to continue to look at this until 2020 to decide whether or not this is a good thing or not. Andy, we need to put a moratorium on this. MOC should be stopped. End of story. Should never be mandatory. And I thank you all for your time.